Alright, so today I want to show you several different ways that you can make what I like to call a poor man's pied. And essentially what it is it's a ball python that looks like a visual pied, but it doesn't actually have two copies of the recessive pied gene. There's actually several different ways you can get there. As a matter of fact, you can get there and not use any pied genes at all to make what it looks like a pied. As a matter of fact, if I handed you the snake, you would see the splotches of white through the snake. And the first thing you would think is that this is a pied, when in fact it doesn't have any pied genes at all in the mix. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to the internet and I want to show you how you can make a poor man's pied. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here on Morphmarket.com and I want to start with a pied. This is what a pied looks like. It's a recessive mutation and it actually takes two copies of the gene to get a visual pied. And essentially what it is it's these patches of white in the snake. And pieds are kind of interesting because you can actually have a small amount of white, and in some cases you can have a large amount of white in the pied. And sometimes you can have a whole clutch of pieds and even have low whites and high whites all in the same clutch. It's almost unpredictable. Although I've seen if you actually breed two high whites together, I think there's a higher probability that you'll actually get higher white pieds. And it's kind of interesting if you mix it with certain genes, like Anchi, for example. Anchi actually reduces the amount of white, and you almost always get a really low white pied if Anchi is in the mix. So we can actually make pied-looking snakes without the pied genes. And the first one I want to start with is this one right here. Take a look at this. At first glance, you would say that looks like a pied, because look at all the white in the snake. As a matter of fact, there's no pied genes at all in this one. This happens to be a gray matter, and I would say this is probably one of the exceptions where you don't need any pied at all to get a really amazing pied looking snake. And essentially the way you make this is it's actually a champagne with a super cinnamon. And I actually kind of, you know, I've been talking about the poor man's pied for a long time, but if you actually take a look at a lot of these prices on some of these snakes, these are pretty expensive in a lot of cases. Sometimes it's not really the poor man's pied, sometimes it's really expensive, but you kind of get around the whole pied dilemma if you're actually, especially if the pied were first coming out, where you spend like $25,000 on a pied, you can actually get there several different ways without spending the money. But now after all these years, the pieds have come down a lot, and pieds are pretty inexpensive. You can pick up a pied for a few $100. So I would say it used to be the poor man's pied, and now things have kind of changed where the pieds have dropped a lot and some of these morphs are expensive. So this is actually the champagne and the super cinnamon. I wanted to show you another gray matter so you can kind of get an idea of some of the examples of just the gray matter. This is the same thing. Looks pretty much like a pied, and in some cases the gray looks almost like a silver metallic, and I would say this one's kind of grayed out. And a lot of times when you mix other genes in with the mix, you can actually slightly change the gray to kind of a goldish metallic color. I've seen that in some cases. This one also sold for $1,500 in 2019, so it actually sold just recently, which is pretty awesome. Here's another one that if you look at it, it looks like a pied. As a matter of fact, this is a champagne het pied. So it's kind of interesting. You can actually take the champagne, breed it to a visual pied. All the offspring will come out as with one copy of the pied gene. Half of them will come out as champagne, and all the champagne het pieds will actually look like this, where it actually looks like a pied. And it's kind of interesting if you actually took a champagne and you bred it out to where you got the visual pied with the champagne. It's actually an all-white snake. You can't even tell that the pied is in there. So it's kind of a powerful breed. As a matter of fact, these are selling for quite a bit. This one actually sold for $650. Here's another example of the same thing. This is a champagne het pied, 66% het ghost. And I really like how it really defines, it almost looks like a real pied with a really defined markers around the color and a really stark white. And it's kind of interesting. Sometimes you'll actually get het pieds that some people will refer to them as ringers, where it'll just have one little ring of white. Sometimes we call that a ringer. Sometimes it's unpredictable, but I say in this case, most of the ones that I've actually seen champagne het pied, they all look like visual pieds. Here's another one that's kind of an interesting anomaly. As a matter of fact, there's not a whole lot of them, and they're really expensive. This is actually an urban camo, and an urban camo is actually the sandblast gene, and it is also het pied. So for example, take a look at this one. This is actually a sandblast. They listed as 66% het pied because of the breeding, but you know for sure because of the white splotches coming out through the snake that this is 100% het pied, and it's pretty awesome. This one actually, if you go back and look at the price, this actually sold for $5,500. Born in 2019, it actually sold. So that is kind of a crazy price. Not really the poor man's pied, I would say in this case, but it's a different way to get there without actually going back and, you know, producing the visual pied. So you can actually take like a sandblast, breed it to a visual pied. Half the babies would come out as sandblast, het pied, urban camos. Here's another urban camo. I thought that was kind of interesting. This one actually has some more genes in the mix, and you can see the white is kind of pushed down on the side. This almost looks like a reticulated python with a pied. If you look at the pied retics, a lot of times it just has color along the belly and doesn't really break through the top. And this one actually has super cinnamon, pastel, sandblast, and het pied. So you can see the sandblast and het pied is what's giving it the white, and then it has super cinnamon and pastel on top of it. Really darkens up the background. So here's another one. This is kind of an anomaly. From here on out, we'll kind of look at what we call ringers, and it's not always 100% when you're actually making a ringer. And a ringer, essentially what it is, it's just a lot of people will say it's actually an indication that the snake is het pied. If you have a little bit of white coming up around the belly, sometimes it forms a circle all the way around the snake. And it's kind of interesting. I've been looking through all the different ringers over on Morphmarket, and it really seems to be associated with the super cinnamon. So here is another super cinnamon het pied, and you can see this one is a really strong ringer on the back. It doesn't really look like, you know, some of the champagne het pieds where it has a really strong pied influence on the visual appearance. And the interesting thing about the super cinnamon het pied, you always don't get the ringer. You don't always get it. So as a matter of fact, I've actually seen some super cinnamon het pieds that don't have any white. So it's kind of a random anomaly. Sometimes it seems like it's associated with just certain genes. Here's another one. This is the super black pastel. It kind of acts the same way as the super cinnamon. You get this little influence of this. This almost looks like a couple ringers right on the side. This also has fire in the mix, and the fire really lightens the black. Usually it would be like a jet black snake. Here's another one. This is actually not the super cinnamon. This is just one copy of the cinnamon, and it seems like just one copy of the cinnamon and the het pied, a lot of times you'll also get a ringer, and it doesn't really matter if there's other genes in the mix. This actually happens to be the cinnamon, spider, yellow belly, het pied. Here's another example that has cinnamon and het pied. You can see the ringer also has banana in the mix, and you don't always get it in all cases. It's just, I'd say it's probably maybe 10% of the time you'll actually get a ringer with the cinnamon or the super cinnamon. Here's another one. This is actually the cinnamon, calabash, orange dream, het pied. You can see the ringer is probably coming from the cinnamon and the het pied. I've also found in a lot of cases you'll actually see it from the orange dream and the het pied. Seems like there's a higher number of ringers when you have orange dream. So this one actually has cinnamon and orange dream in it. If you take a look at this one, this is orange dream and het pied. Well, you can definitely see the ringer from that with the ultramel and the ghost. It's kind of interesting. It seems like certain genes are more prone to these ringers. And here's another one. This is the orange dream het pied with yellow belly and leopard in the mix. You can definitely see this one has just a small little ringer, indicating that it's, you know, this is usually it's a pretty good indicator that it's het pied. It's kind of unpredictable in some of these, like with the cinnamon and the orange dream. But I'd say if you're going for really kind of the ultimate poor man's pied, pretty much the best way to go is like with a gray matter or something like a champagne het pied. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And James Montz asks, what is the deal with the super bamboo? They are about $1,000 a piece over on Morphmarket, and there's not very many of them. And that is a very good question. As a matter of fact, when I first started in ball pythons, super bamboos were selling for about $4,000, and bamboos like Bobby here around my neck, they were selling for $2,000. As a matter of fact, I didn't think I'd ever get into the project. I finally scraped up enough money to buy Bobby here. He's about, I think I paid about $1,200 for Bobby back in the day, and I produced a lot of bamboos. And the super bamboo is kind of interesting because in order to get it, you need to breed something like a male bamboo back to a female bamboo to get the super, which is an all-white snake with blue eyes. So it's kind of interesting because, you know, back when they were about $4,000 and people were producing a lot of them, they were producing some females, and it really takes several years to get those females up to size before you can breed the males back to the females. So at this point, I would say we might have quite a few females that are of age, but I don't think there's a lot of people actually taking male bamboos, breeding them back to the females to get the supers. So it's kind of a lag from the old days when the prices were really high. A lot of people are just kind of still waiting on the females to mature to actually get a lot of super bamboos. And a lot of times, even, you know, once snakes kind of get to kind of a plateau, kind of where bamboos are right now, you can pick them up for a few $100. Sometimes the supers still demand a higher price because you can actually take that super, breed it to anything like a normal, and you'll get a whole clutch of bamboos. So a lot of people consider it a really good investment and will pay a little bit more for the super bamboo. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.